Imagine waking up and remembering nothing. Not your name, not your job, not your story, just breath. The pale ceiling, the dull ache of being, no calendar, no voice, no narrative to crawl into. Would you still get up? Would you still care? Marcus Aurelius believed you should. Not because someone told you to. Not because the alarm clock shrieked or the world demanded your presence. But because there was something sacred, even holy, about the simple act of rising with intention. There is a kind of discipline that doesn't scream. It doesn't shout over crowds. It doesn't make a checklist or post its productivity hacks to Instagram. It just gets up again and again, quietly, without applause, without needing an audience. This is not motivation. It is not ambition. It is not the dopamine drip of external validation. It is purpose. And purpose, as Marcus saw it, was not a luxury. It was a burden you must choose every single day. The ancient Stoics didn't care how you felt about your calling. They didn't ask whether you were passionate or ready or in the mood. They asked one thing: are you aligned? Are you doing what fits the role that life in all its unpredictable choreography has handed you? For Marcus, emperor of Rome and prisoner of his own palace, this question wasn't theoretical. It was survival. Every morning he opened his eyes to politics, betrayal, disease, war, and still, he wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself I have to go to work as a human being. Not a king, not a philosopher, a human being." What does that mean? To work as a human being. Maybe it means doing the hard thing, not because it guarantees success, but because it feels honest. Maybe it means brushing your teeth when you're depressed, calling your mother when you'd rather disappear, starting over when no one else knows you failed. Maybe it means showing up for your life without needing it to show up for you. Most people think purpose is something you find, like a buried treasure or a lottery ticket. But what if purpose is something you practice? Something you commit to awkwardly, imperfectly, quietly, like lighting a candle in the dark with shaking hands. Marcus didn't find his purpose in battle. He found it in duty, in the letters he never sent, in the conversations he rehearsed in his journals, in the conviction that his mind, his judgment, his reason, his virtue were the only things he could truly govern. Even if the empire burned, even if the people he loved betrayed him, even if the gods went silent, he stayed. He stayed because he believed that every day was a referendum on your character. Every act a chance to embody or betray the part of yourself you said you valued most. It's easy to post your values. It's harder to live them when no one's watching, when it's raining, when you're exhausted, when nothing's working and everyone else seems to have opted out. That's where discipline begins, not with force, not with guilt, but with a soft, stubborn refusal to abandon yourself. So, let me ask you, what gets you out of bed? And don't say your job. Don't say your kids. Don't say because I have to. What pulls you gently, insistently out of the warm fog of avoidance? What is your north? If you can't name it, that's okay. But don't ignore the ache. That subtle, gnawing discomfort that whispers, you are meant for something quieter but deeper, something not yet defined but already yours. That is the beginning. That is where purpose lives. And if you're listening, it's probably because something in you is already tired of the noise. So stay. Sit with it. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need to quit your job or start a new religion. You just need to ask, like Marcus did, one question each morning. What is mine to do today? And then ask each evening, did I do it? No drama, no spreadsheet, just the willingness to begin again. And again. Not because life guarantees anything, but because you do. If this made something stir inside you, you might already be walking the Stoic path. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories where stillness becomes strength, where clarity is not loud, where purpose waits, just beneath the noise. Stay with us, there's more. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being constantly connected. You scroll, you like, You comment, you post. And yet at 2 a.m., when the room finally goes silent, you feel hollow. Like you outsourced your soul to 1,000 strangers, and now none of them are picking up. The Stoics never had Instagram, but Marcus Aurelius understood this hollow ache better than most. He wrote in solitude, ruled in chaos, loved in silence. And through it all, he kept returning to one principle: count on yourself. At first, it sounds cold, maybe even selfish, but it isn't about isolation, it's about sovereignty. Marcus didn't mean that you should cut people off or become emotionally unavailable. He meant, don't give the keys to your peace to anyone who doesn't live inside your skin. Most of us were never taught this. We were taught to be agreeable, to seek approval, to look outward for assurance that we are enough, loved enough, smart enough, worthy enough. So we post a photo and check the likes. We vent online and wait for validation. We feel something real: anger, joy, heartbreak, and before it even finishes forming, we rush to share it, to get it witnessed, to make it mean something by having others react. But what if that reaction isn't real? What if the likes are just algorithms and the comments are just projection, and the whole thing is a house of mirrors, designed not to reflect your truth, but to distort it? The Stoic answer: come home. Come back to yourself, not as an ego, but as a witness, a thinker, a being capable of stillness. Marcus wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." And that was in a time when the greatest distraction was a chariot race, not a smartphone engineered to hijack every flicker of attention. To count on yourself, then, is to stop asking people to confirm what you already know. It is to sit with your pain, your doubt, your confusion, and not narrate it to the crowd. It is to do the hard work of discernment without the comfort of claps. It's terrifying, because self-reliance requires silence, and silence reveals everything you've been running from. The disappointment, the shame, the uncertainty. But it also reveals something else: strength. Not the kind you can flaunt in a caption, but the kind that moves like a river beneath the ground. Quiet, relentless, patient. Most people never develop it. Not because they're weak, but because they're afraid to be alone with themselves long enough to hear their own wisdom. So they keep outsourcing. They give strangers veto power over their dreams. They let internet mobs decide what they're allowed to feel. They build identities like resumes, curated and edited and hollow. But Marcus didn't do that. He went to war with his own mind. He questioned his motives. He doubted his temper. He confessed over and over in his journal, not for others, but for himself. He became his own confidant, his own therapist, his own mentor, not because he wanted to be a lone wolf, but because he knew that when the storms came, and they always came, no one could feel the rain for him. So he trained. He trained his mind to hold space for grief without being consumed. He trained his character to withstand flattery without becoming soft. He trained his heart to serve others without expecting to be thanked. This is not about being invulnerable. It's about being intact. Intact even when misunderstood. Intact even when unsupported. Intact even when no one claps when you succeed. It's easy to build your identity out of noise. Harder to build it out of silence. But that's what Stoicism offers: a blueprint for inner authority. Not arrogance, not superiority, just quiet strength. So if you feel tired of performing, if you feel like your worth is being rented out for hearts and thumbs and hollow affirmations, if you feel like you've been scrolling through other people's opinions, hoping to find your own, maybe it's time to reclaim something. Yourself, your reason, your center. It won't be flashy, it won't be quick, but it will be real. And the moment you stop outsourcing your self-respect, the moment you stop checking who agrees before acting on what you know is right, that's the moment you start becoming whole. So go ahead, count on yourself. Not because you have all the answers, but because you are finally willing to ask the right questions and stay long enough to hear what your own soul whispers back. If that feels unfamiliar, you're not alone. You're just returning. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where self-reliance isn't isolation. It's intimacy with the only voice that's never left you. Yours. There's something almost holy about doing the same thing every day, especially when no one sees it. The world doesn't reward quiet repetition. It applauds breakthroughs, epiphanies, transformations. But you know what actually changes a life. Making your bed, writing one paragraph, stretching for 5 minutes, breathing through one more hard hour without running away. It's not the grand gestures, it's the quiet ones. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius lived it. He didn't wait for inspiration. He didn't wait for the perfect time. He showed up. Every morning he sat with his thoughts. Not because he felt like it, but because he had to. Because the work of becoming who you are supposed to be doesn't pause for your moods. He wrote about doing the work of a human being, even when it was dull, even when it hurt, even when his soul felt heavy and his heart uncertain. And what is the work of a human being? It's not crushing to-do lists or building empires. It's staying present. It's feeding your body when you'd rather numb it. It's showing up to the page or the prayer or the practice without needing fireworks. It's letting routine become ritual. But that's hard in our world. We are addicted to novelty. Conditioned by algorithms, we think progress has to look dramatic. We think healing has to feel euphoric. We think change has to be visible, shareable, marketable. But real change is often invisible. It looks like doing the right thing when no one thanks you. It looks like keeping a promise to yourself after you've broken it 10 times before. It looks like not quitting today, even though yesterday was terrible and tomorrow looks worse. It's not sexy. It's sacred. There's a moment that happens sometimes at 5 a.m., sometimes at 11 p.m., where you stand in front of your life and you have a choice. Will I show up for it? Not as a hero, just as a participant. That's what Marcus meant when he said to concentrate every minute like a Roman. Not to posture, not to pretend, but to live each moment as if it might be your last honest chance. You don't need motivation, you need rhythm. The kind of rhythm that doesn't ask how you feel, only whether you remember why you began. Even the smallest task, if done with care, becomes a form of devotion. Even the most mundane act, if done with presence, becomes a protest against the chaos. But let's be honest. Some mornings you won't feel like it. The bed will be too warm, the mind too noisy, the world too heavy, and no one will know if you don't show up. That's the test. That's when the discipline becomes real, not when you're inspired, but when you're not. And you still do the thing, not because it's urgent, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. Your practice, your promise, your piece of the day to shape with integrity. And each time you choose to keep it, you deepen a groove in your character. That groove becomes a path. That path becomes a way of being. And eventually that way becomes who you are. So start small. Don't try to rebuild your life in one weekend. Just pick one thing, one moment, one act. Water the plant. Return the text. Sit still for 3 breaths. And do it again tomorrow. Not to prove something, but to remember something, that you are here, that you matter, that showing up however imperfectly is the only thing life has ever asked of you. And if you're still breathing, you haven't missed your chance. So, what's your ritual? What's your tiny rebellion against the entropy of existence? Choose it, honor it, repeat it, because the life you're trying to build isn't waiting at the end of a finish line. It's quietly forming under your feet each time you take one small, deliberate step. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where we show up not to impress, but to remember who we are when no one's watching. Stay close. Comfort is a sweet lie. It tells you that everything is fine, that you've arrived, that nothing needs to change. But the soul knows better. The soul whispers in moments of silence. You're softening, you're slipping, you're forgetting who you were when things were harder. That's why the Stoics practiced hardship, not because they were masochists, but because they didn't trust comfort to tell the truth. Marcus Aurelius, even at the height of his power, chose simplicity, chose restraint, chose to walk toward discomfort, not to prove anything, but to become someone. There is a kind of suffering that's forced on you, and there is another kind that you choose. The first breaks you, the second prepares you. Most people avoid both, but the Stoic chooses the second, to survive the first. Because when life hits hard, and it will, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training. So train. Train by skipping the shortcut, by delaying the pleasure, by doing one more rep when your mind begs you to stop. Not because you need to punish yourself, but because you need to free yourself. Free yourself from needing the latte to feel calm, from needing praise to feel worthy, from needing distraction to feel okay in your own skin. Voluntary discomfort is not deprivation, it's liberation. It reminds you, I can survive this, I can do hard things, I am not fragile. And that reminder becomes armor. Not the kind that makes you invincible, but the kind that keeps you whole when the storm finds you. Which it will. Because life doesn't care if you're ready. It will take your comfort, your plans, your sense of control. And if you haven't practiced letting go, you'll break with them. But if you've trained, if you've skipped a meal just to remind yourself you won't die, if you've walked in the rain when you could have driven, if you've turned off the phone when silence felt unbearable, then you'll know that suffering can be met, held, endured. Not because you like it, but because it's no longer foreign. Pain becomes less terrifying when it's not a stranger. And gratitude becomes deeper when it's no longer assumed. Because that's the other gift discomfort gives you. It sharpens your appreciation. The warm meal tastes better after hunger. The bed feels sacred after a night of restless vigil. The kind word reaches deeper when it follows a long silence. Discomfort doesn't shrink your joy. It stretches it. But this practice, this discipline, it's not popular. We're told to chase ease, to curate a life that looks effortless. But Stoicism asks, what kind of person do you become when ease is taken from you? That's the question to live with, because comfort fades, but character doesn't. And the thorn you choose today might be the thing that saves you when life starts cutting without asking. So choose one, not to impress anyone, not to earn virtue points, but to remember that you don't need as much as you've been told. And what you do need lives mostly inside. Try it. Wake up an hour earlier, sleep without a pillow, say no to dessert. Sit in stillness instead of entertainment. Let it be small. Let it be quiet, but let it matter. And when it gets hard, and it will, don't distract, don't justify, just breathe, stay, listen. Let the discomfort speak to you not as an enemy, but as a mirror. What is it showing you? What are you still clinging to? What have you made essential? That is not. This is not about being ascetic. It's about being awake, fully here, fully sovereign. Because when you no longer fear discomfort, you no longer fear life. You walk lighter, you need less. You love more purely because you're not using others to soothe your own avoidance. This is Stoicism, not stiff, not cold, but clear, rooted, unflinching. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where we practice thorns not to suffer, but to become untangled from the need for soft illusions. You've probably tried to control something that didn't belong to you. The weather, the outcome, the way someone saw you or didn't, the message that never came, the future that keeps folding in ways you didn't predict. And each time, it slips. Because no matter how tightly you grip it, life doesn't answer to you. That's not a punishment, it's a law. And once you stop resisting that law, something strange happens. You start to breathe again. Marcus Aurelius wrote it like a mantra. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. It sounds simple, But look at how much of your suffering comes from forgetting that. From thinking that if you just try harder, say it better, plan it tighter, you can make things bend to your will. But the Stoics knew that's not will, that's illusion. Your will isn't measured by how many things you can dominate. It's measured by how many things you can release. With dignity, with calm, with no bitterness left in your hands. The dichotomy of control isn't just an idea, it's a doorway. One side holds everything you can touch. Your words, your choices, your integrity, your attention. The other side holds everything else. Their reactions, their timeline, their understanding, the wind, the traffic, the rising sea. And your peace lives in knowing which side to stand on. You are the candle, but you are not the wind. So protect your flame. Don't waste your life yelling at the weather. Instead, cup your hands around what is yours, your attitude, your effort, your presence. That's enough. It has to be. Because when you chase control where none exists, you become frantic. You micromanage. You overthink. You try to manipulate outcomes instead of mastering your own mindset. And when it doesn't work, because it never does, you blame yourself. You spiral. You break. But Marcus didn't break. Even when the empire trembled, even when plague swept the streets, even when death took those he loved. He didn't pretend to control it. He controlled what he could. How he greeted the day, how he responded to insult, how he conducted himself when no one was watching. And that was enough to call it a life of excellence. So here's the question. What are you holding that was never yours to carry? Whose opinion? What outcome? Which future you still think you can force into being? Can you set it down? Not because it doesn't matter, but because your peace matters more. This is not passivity. This is not surrender. This is the deepest kind of discipline, to act with full heart and clean hands, and then to let go. To love without possession. To plan without obsession. To show up without attachment. Can you imagine that? Doing your best and leaving the rest to the unfolding of things. Not in resignation, but in respect. Respect for the complexity of life. Respect for the mystery that unfolds beyond your reach. Because there is a difference between responsibility and control. You are responsible for your effort. You are not responsible for their response. You are responsible for your honesty. You are not responsible for being understood. You are responsible for your discipline. You are not responsible for the fruits of it. So draw the line. And when the world swirls with uncertainty and nothing goes as planned, return to that line. Ask, is this mine? If it is, hold it with everything you've got. If it isn't, let it drift like a leaf on a stream. Let it go so you don't go with it. Because that's how people lose themselves. Not through one bad decision, but through a million little entanglements, trying to fix what they were never meant to hold. But not you. Not anymore. If you're here, you're remembering. You're returning to the still center inside, the one that doesn't flinch when the winds rise. The one that knows happiness is not the flame, but the hand steady enough to guard it. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where we don't fight for control. We choose where to place our calm. There's a difference between pain and identity. Pain happens. It knocks. It stays too long. It rearranges your life. But identity, that's what you choose in response. And the Stoics chose not to be victims. Marcus Aurelius, betrayed by friends, crushed by grief, burdened with rule, never once said, "Why me?" Not out loud, not in his writings, not even in the privacy of his soul. Instead, he asked, "How will I carry this?" Because pain, he knew, is not an excuse to abandon your virtue. It's the stage on which your virtue is revealed. Anyone can be calm when the sun is shining. Anyone can be kind when they're loved. Anyone can speak wisely when they're not afraid. But who are you when you're hurting? That's the test, and no one can take it for you. You can't outsource resilience. You can't borrow character. You can't hand your pain to someone else and ask them to make sense of it. You have to meet it yourself. You have to sit with it not as a victim, but as a student. That's what the Stoics taught. Don't pretend you're fine. Don't deny that it hurts, but don't let the wound become who you are. You are not your betrayal. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your childhood. You are not your divorce. You are not your losses lined up like gravestones. You are what you choose to do with them. That choice is everything. It's the line between becoming bitter and becoming wise, between building a wall and building a temple. Because there's something holy in refusing to collapse. Not because you're trying to look strong, but because you know what happens when you don't. You abandon yourself. You let the pain narrate your life. You wait for someone to rescue you from what only you can walk through. But no one is coming. Not because people don't care, but because no one else has your feet. No one else sees the exact terrain of your sorrow. Only you can decide. Will this make me smaller or more spacious? Will I let it crush me or carve me into something I respect? It's not about pretending you're okay. It's about remembering, even here I have agency. Even now I can choose the next word, the next breath, the next... Marcus wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He didn't mean that pain disappears if you're stoic enough. He meant that pain is part of the path, that it is a forge, not a verdict. And if you can walk through it not as a victim but as a participant in your own evolution, then the pain transforms. It doesn't vanish, but it becomes something you carry with grace, something you draw strength from, something you no longer need to resent. The story changes. You are no longer the person pain broke. You are the person it revealed. And maybe that person was always there, quiet, waiting, watching, waiting for you to stop, waiting to be saved, and start acting like someone worth saving. That's the power of this principle. It doesn't require that you be healed, only that you stop handing your power to whatever hurt you. So ask yourself, where have I made my suffering into a story I repeat? Where have I mistaken survival for identity? Where am I still waiting for someone to acknowledge how unfair it was before I allow myself to move on? And what if I let go? Not to forget, but to be free. Free to create something with the ashes. Free to build something sacred from what broke. This is not bypassing. This is transcendence. The kind that doesn't come from ignoring the pain, but from refusing to let it have the last word. You can suffer deeply and still refuse to play the victim. That refusal is not denial. It is a declaration. I may bleed, but I still choose how I walk. You're listening to silent sage stories where pain is honored, but never allowed to decide who you become. There's a moment at the end of the day when the noise quiets and the mirror appears. Not the one in your bathroom, the one inside. The one that doesn't reflect your face, but your choices. Marcus Aurelius stood before that mirror every night. He didn't call it a ritual. He didn't light incense or wear white. He just asked himself quietly, what did I do today that honored my nature? Where did I stray from my values? What did I fear? And why? He wrote these reflections not for others, but for himself. Not to impress, but to understand. Because the soul, like a garden, grows wild, without pruning, and each night is a chance to trim back the drift. This practice wasn't about shame. It was about clarity. Not I failed, but I see now. Not I should have been perfect, but I want to do better here and here. It's easy to go to bed distracted, to let the day blur behind dopamine and fatigue. But the Stoics chose the harder thing. They chose to witness themselves. Because without witness, you forget. You forget who you said you wanted to be. You forget where you've been slipping. You forget how much your actions matter, especially the small ones. So they paused. They asked, did I meet my duties with dignity? Did I let my temper steer the wheel? Did I speak with care or with ego? This kind of honesty hurts. Not because you're bad, but because you're not done. And the mirror shows you that. Shows you the gap between your ideals and your actions, not to punish you, but to guide you. That gap is not failure. It's invitation. Invitation to realign. To remember. To come back to the practice, not because you fell off, but because you are worthy of continuing. And there is no better time to remember than the end of the day. Because memory settles then. Because the world quiets. Because the heart finally whispers what it was trying to say all along. In a world that forgets itself every 5 minutes, remembering becomes a spiritual act. So here's what the mirror might ask you tonight. What did you avoid? Where did you act from fear instead of principle? Where were you generous? Where were you small? What did you carry today that wasn't yours? What did you neglect today that was? And most of all, did you live today as if your soul was watching? Because it was. It always is. And that witness doesn't judge you with cruelty. It judges with potential. It sees what you could be and gently asks, are you still becoming? The Stoics believed that death was always near, not to scare us, but to sharpen us. So don't waste the night. Let it teach you. Let it strip you clean of pretense. Let it prepare you for a more intentional morning. Because how you close the day shapes how you open the next. And a day that ends in reflection becomes more than a blur. It becomes a step, not back, not sideways, but inward, closer to the person you keep trying to become. So tonight, don't just fall asleep, fall into yourself. Sit for 5 minutes. Stare at the dark ceiling. Speak nothing aloud. Just look in the mirror. And when you see something you don't like, don't flinch. Don't scroll away. Don't explain. Just notice. And promise yourself with gentleness. Tomorrow I'll aim better. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just better. And that will be enough. That is what builds character, not thunder, but drizzle. Not epiphanies, but echoes. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where we end, not with answers, but with a question quietly left in your hands. When the day fades, who are you in the dark? Sit with that. Let it change you. We'll be here in the silence that follows until you're ready to begin again.